Good afternoon. For those of you who I've not met, I'm Sheila Edwards-Lang, and I have the honor of serving as the Chancellor here at UW Tacoma. And welcome to this exciting unveiling of this project. This is actually the second interpretive history display that we've done in Milgard Hall. And we opened this building in my first year here, and we had the pleasure of the display outside. So if you've not seen that, that initial project is a permanent Puyallup tribal land acknowledgement, and it was made possible through a partnership guided by Connie McLeod and the Heritage Division of the Puyallup tribe. As our land acknowledgement, and I'll read from it today, the University of Washington Tacoma campus is located on the lands of the Puyallup people. The campus, including Milgard Hall, is near the original Puyallup Village site that was known as Winding River. So this installation weaves the past and present, honoring the Puyallup people's deep and enduring connection to this land. And this permanent acknowledgement is one small act of an ongoing process of honoring the past while working together with local tribes to build a more inclusive and thoughtful community. So as UWT's Chancellor, I'm always inspired by the creativity and civic-mindedness of our partners, our faculty, our community leaders. And today, our four-year-old, it's a four-year-old, for anybody who's ever had a four-year-old, you know that's the age where they get really interesting. But this is our four-year-old civil engineering program, is almost right next door to the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And that's considered one of the world's most famous and influential civil engineering landmarks. And my husband is a fifth-generation Washingtonian, and he tells stories about Gallup and Gertie. So for people who grew up here, it is really a historic site. Our civil engineering graduates, even though it is new, are already highly sought after beyond the South Sound and throughout Washington. Washington and state actually ranks in the top 5 for the total number of civil engineering jobs, which are largely driven by employment in the Seattle-Tacoma Bellevue metropolitan area. Many of you in this room have helped undergraduate students, and I look around and I see some of you who've served as advisors. Many of you are on our committees, or you helped hire our students, or you have hosted them for internships, or you've been part of their capstones. So we thank you for that, because it does truly take a village to produce a graduate here. Our graduates from UWT go on to become civic leaders, entrepreneurs, mentors, and community problem solvers. They design and construct remarkable infrastructure and tackle some of our region's most pressing issues, like water pollution and landslide mitigation. So I'm excited by the conversations that this exhibit will spark between faculty, students, engineering professionals, and students, helping tomorrow's engineers understand and appreciate the importance of place as they complete their studies here. So I encourage you to spend time engaging with both exhibits, the one outside and the one that we're going to commemorate today. You'll notice similarities, as well as several new community partners for the Tacoma Narrows Bridge project, including local museums and artists. So I want to thank and acknowledge the collective effort that was involved in bringing this display to fruition, and with particular gratitude to the two guys who actually led on both of these exhibits, and that is Michael Sullivan and Mark Pagano, once again leading the effort to make our university stand out. So I'd like to invite Mark to come up and give us an overview of what we're going to do today and introduce the project to you all. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chancellor Lang. I love it when she says nice things about me. And thank you all for coming too. It's standing room only. Sorry about that, folks in the back of the room. That's because Michael Sullivan and Sheila are here today. Yeah. But thank you all for coming. Also, thank you, and I'm going to formally thank our partners on this project later in the program. But I'm thrilled that all of you are here today to enjoy this with us. What our plan for today is I'm going to give a quick overview of how the idea of this display came about. And then for the important part, the history, the colorful history, which only Michael Sullivan can talk about. He'll come up and talk about the colorful history of this bridge and the effect it had on the community, which is kind of the background of the display. And then I'll come up just for a couple more minutes at the end and talk about how the display got up on the wall, because they had to come from an idea all the way to something on the wall. And I'll recognize some people in the room. And then we're going to go upstairs. And for those that asked, the refreshments are upstairs. So people were worried, where's the refreshments? They're upstairs. And you can gaze at the display. You can talk to the people who worked on it. You can get refreshments. Take your time. You can stay all afternoon if you like. So for those of you who don't know the background of this building we're in right now, this building is pretty new. It smells new to me still. But the design of this building the pre-design was first funded by the state in 2017. Then in 2019, they funded the actual building of it. But when they funded it in 2019, you don't get the money until 2020. So the real hard design started in 2020 with construction. And then as Chancellor Edwards Lang says, we opened this building in November 21. And then the display next door went on the wall the following spring. Okay, so this building is so new, still pretty new, and now at the same time this building got funded, 2 new programs got funded at the University of Washington, Tacoma, mechanical engineering and civil engineering. We are right now getting ready to graduate our 3rd cohort of mechanical engineering students and our 2nd cohort of civil engineering students, and many of them are in the room because I recognize you, okay? So anyway, as the Chancellor said, now we have the closest civil engineering, 4-year civil engineering program in the whole world to the most famous, I believe it's the most famous civil engineering landmark in the whole world, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And another kind of detail is the place that we decided to put this display is right up on the 3rd floor of this building. That's the back side of the building, right up there on the 3rd floor, and it's actually facing the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Granted, we do have the hilltop of Tacoma in between here and there, so you can't see the bridge, but the students can look right out their senior design lab windows and think about the bridge right over there. So it's all good and it's all exciting, and we're going to tell you a little bit about it now. So the design was modeled kind of in form and style, but not in artistic elements, to the display next door, which covers the timber history of Tacoma. We're a lot about telling stories here at the University of Washington, Tacoma, because we like for our students to leave knowing about this place, understanding the place here and its effect that it had on the larger world around us. So we've put several displays in here now, and this is the one right next door on the history of Tacoma and its rise and fall in the timber industry. So we kind of modeled it after that, and Michael was pretty easy to convince to work on this. We thought it was very successful, our partnership working next door, and there was a lot of positive feedback about that display. So when people inquired about how about doing the Tacoma Narrow Bridge, we agreed to scope that out and look at that as well. So whenever you're going to do something like this, the first thing you have to do is you have to get your palette. So we went round and round about that. We thought something this important maybe should be downstairs, but then we thought, you know, really the best audience or the most important audience are our civil engineering students. So that's how we kind of zeroed in on putting this display right outside the senior design lab on the 3rd floor. And you're all going to go up there pretty soon. But you go in this door, and you can see NGL 336, that lab right there is the Civil Engineering Senior Design Lab, so no civil engineering student can get out of UWT without spending lots of time in that lab. And those 3 walls there are the palette for this design. So the way we started was the same way we started next door, is once we had our palette and knew we were going to do it, we mapped out the story. And the story is told in 3 sections. The first section is the colorful history of the bridge, and a lot of people overlook that. They just know about the bridge because of the accident. But we wanted to tell the story of how the bridge got there, why it got there, and that story is told in the first panel. And then, of course, you got to tell about the thing that made the Tacoma Narrows Bridge famous, was Galloping Gertie. So we tell that on panel 2. And then on panel 3, we wanted to end the story in the happy ever after. So yes, the bridge did fall down, but the city of Tacoma has grit, determination, resilience. They rebuilt the bridge. It did take 10 years, but in 1950, we rebuilt the bridge, and that's been so successful, it required a second bridge in 2007. So we end on a happy note, and to tell the story, before we go upstairs, I'm gonna invite my colleague, Michael Sullivan, to come up, and he's gonna talk a little bit about the background.
Great, thank you, Mark. When I first was approached by Mark, I had taught Northwest history here for 20 some odd years, and Mark approached me about a brand new building on campus and said, all of our buildings have a backstory because we're reusing all these old buildings, and in a way the buildings are chapters in the big story about where we live, about our part of the world, about Tacoma and about South Sound. And he said, but we got a new building and we don't have a story. It deserves a story too. So that's how what happened next door came about. And then I have to thank the chancellor for being tolerant of the fact that when we started using the building to tell local stories as a way of connecting with the community, I think we all kind of agreed that the campus does really serve our greater community. And those of us that are part of the campus and part of the campus community also are connections with the larger community. And really the stories that the campus tells are bigger than just the campus. They're the whole community's stories. So we got down with the story of timber, and of course we have the Prairie Line. I mean, we have all these things that connect. But maybe one of the most sort of immediately recognized around the world stories has to do with our efforts at building a bridge across the Narrows. I forget who it was, the old adage that you learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. Boy, have we got a story to prove that for you. So that was our effort, was to go ahead and try to use the buildings and use the place that is the UW campus today as a way of conveying some of the stories that tell about our whole community's past. And that was the effort we took on here. The story of building the Tacoma Narrows Bridge and ultimately the ultimate failure of the bridge was just the kind of the heart of the big story. The story really starts before that. Tacoma had already taken on a challenge, an engineering, a construction challenge, a physical problem challenge that really starts this whole story. In the 1920s, when the city of Tacoma built the hydroelectric dam at Cushman, the big issue was to bring transmission lines all the way to the city. Was it practical to build a dam to generate electricity for an entire city when waterways and everything were in the way? In order to do it, we had to figure out a way to get transmission lines to the city. And the big problem was getting across the Tacoma Narrows. The longest single belly span of any transmission line anywhere in the world in the early 1920s was just over 2/3 of a mile. And that was on dry land between two mountaintops. In order to get transmission lines across the Narrows, we had to build towers and have a single span across that was more than a mile. For the first time to reach more than a mile with a single span. And it was going to be across salt water, and it was going to be in a climate where we could accumulate ice and all kinds of things that could go wrong. But Tacoma Public Utilities ended up pioneering the design of towers that had huge big rollers on top so they could manage the movement of the cables. And ultimately 6 transmission lines were brought across the Tacoma Narrows. And in 1925, President Coolidge pushed a button, and by telegraph, they were able to start power running. It was the confidence that was gained from having cables span more than a mile across the Tacoma Narrows that almost immediately had people beginning to think we could build a bridge, motor bridge. And of course, in the 20s, we're starting to accommodate automobiles and all that stuff, and so there's an emerging need to be able to build it. An economic depression happens, a state being able to fund something like this, all this stuff comes up, and it makes it challenging to be able to think about it, but to build a bridge across. And conventional thought about bridge was a rigid bridge across the waterway. Let's see if I can get this to move forward. But in 1936, 1937, the Golden Gate Bridge down in San Francisco was completed with great fanfare. Longest bridge in the world, longest span between towers in the world, and it used suspension cables to be able to build a bridge. And that was kind of the thing that sparked it. Also, during the 1930s, FDR, the New Deal, just the excitement about big projects, Grand Coulee dams and all kinds of stuff. Sure, let's build a bridge. So an effort starts. The Washington State Legislature creates an entity to be able to finance building a bridge. This signal keeps going off. So by the time the Golden Gate Bridge is opened, Washington State is on its way to actually building our own suspension bridge across. The first crossing by a bridge over Puget Sound anywhere, just like the cables of the transmission line cables were the first crossing. So the effort was underway. I won't go into the politics of what it cost originally and then all of the doge of its day, figuring out a cheaper way to save money by building it different and kind of I wish I had time to go into the life of Leon Mosif, the designer of the bridge, who had worked on the two longest bridges in the world and now moved confidently to the third longest bridge in the world. And as he moved confidently forward, he became more and more risky and more adventurous about the design. And by 1937, had come up with a design for the bridge, what would become Galloping Gertie. Tacoma Narrows Bridge would be finished in the summer of 1940. That character alone deserves a book. I mean, it's just a fascinating guy who's just like Icarus, who's just flying closer and closer to the sun all the time, and it just happens that when his reach exceeds his grasp, it's here in Tacoma and with the completion of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Pictures tell 1,000 words, and the fact that by 1940 there were really good small domestic cameras available meant that there was a lot of footage done. Nobody believed at the time that there was any kind of normal to a bridge deck that was rising and falling in a relatively light wind. You know, the range at the main span would be a greater range of lift and fall than the ceiling in this room. Think about that for a second. You're driving over the bridge, there'd be a truck on the other side, and the headlights from the vehicle on the other side would disappear behind the undulating mound of the bridge deck in front of you as you made your way across. Indeed, something was wrong. University of Washington was brought in early on. They kicked into gear and created wind tunnel models, copies of the bridge to begin, that were already being studied, already animated, built, and available for analysis in 1940, before the failure. And we understand they actually stress tested some of the models to the point where they failed before the bridge failed. So they would have seen the ghost of what was in the future, the ghost of the future in the failure in the wind tunnels at the University of Washington. In the film cut that is now accessible through the QR codes on the exhibit starts with the wind tunnel, with the models in the wind tunnel at the University of Washington. And it's spooky how they were able to anticipate through the model not just the undulation that was there from the very beginning, but the somewhat unprecedented twisting that started in November of that year with excessive winds that went beyond anything that the bridge had seen during construction or until it was opened. And that model at the beginning of the film shows that twisting undulation that we've all seen in the film. And then we all know that in November, I mean, a matter of just a few months after the completion of the bridge, the complete and utter failure of the bridge. There's still, I mean, if Steven Spielberg and Buster Keaton got together to make a movie, they couldn't come up with footage as good as there is of Galloping Gertie's actual failure in November of 1940. It's still absolutely spellbinding to imagine that big of an inanimate object going through that kind of contortion and then the complete disaster in two major phases when it collapses. Anyway, it's an incredible story of just, you know, such ambition, such hope, such optimism. You know, it's like the first moonshot on the launch pad and blowing up in, you know, before it reaches full, you know, gets out of the atmosphere. That's kind of the event that happened here. And we were fortunate that because newsreels and movies were out, that it was seen around the world almost immediately. It would take 10 years. World War II would come, there would be delays. It would be 1950 before the second bridge is completed. And by that time, they were able to widen the bridge, correct most of the engineering shortcomings of the original design, and build the 1950s bridge, which is still with us today, still a survivor. And then, as we all know, into this century, the building of the third bridge, the third act to the play. And with the help of the friends at Richlight, I think we exhibited the design differences of the three through scaled models. And Lance, credit to you for coming up with that idea, Lance Kagan, the people at Rotator, with the idea of actually building rigid three-dimensional models of those three towers that all to equal scale, so you can look at all three of those right next to one another in the exhibit. Anyway, I could go on because there's so many good stories. There's just when they were finishing the 1950s bridge, they were putting the main cable saddles on top of the tower. There was a workman on top of the tower in 1950. Anyway, the saddles are these huge cast steel saddles that the constant main cables that went from anchorages on the shore up over the top of the tower, down the middle and up over the tower. Those are continuous rope cable that go over. The way the towers support those is through big saddles, well, like a horse saddle, that would allow the cable to be able to move a little bit. There's a guy on top of the tower bolting the first saddle, massive. I mean, they're tons and tons, single big piece of steel. He's ratcheting down. There's a crane that's lifted it up into position 400 feet in the air. And an earthquake, this is I said 1950, 1949. The 1949 earthquake hits, and that guy's on top of it. The entire tower goes into motion. He's standing on the far side. He begins to run away from where he's bolting, and the saddle breaks completely loose from the bolts it's got and starts sliding across the top of the tower towards him. He jumps, actually steps on the saddle and jumps and grabs a safety line off the crane, and the entire saddle falls 400 feet off the top onto a Foss barge with guys standing around the barge, and the saddle goes right through the barge. Everybody's launched off. Anyway, a small digression in many stories. Nobody was killed. The guy on top of the tower gave up working in bridge engineering and opened a tavern. So anyway, I'm sorry. I'm so quick to digress into the many stories. But anyway, you get an idea of what we tried to do with the display upstairs. We also wanted to provoke some thought and introduce for students in the engineering program some opportunities for research and study, and for those of us that come from the humanities, a little bit of history along the way too, all built into the exhibit. So all those components are there. Mark's and Dr. Pagano is an engineer and I'm a historian, so hopefully between our two interests we came up with something that connects with people. So anyway, with that, I'm sorry I took so long. I feel like I went too long. But anyway, I'll give it back to Mark.
Thank you, Michael. Historians are way more interesting than engineers usually, so I appreciate that. So what we did is after we kind of got the story together and the palette, we needed somebody, because you don't let an engineer and a historian design the display. So we pitched this idea to a local artist. Let me get my correct slide here. And they were in right away. That was Lance, who's you're going to get introduced formally in a minute. So they started working on the design, and this is a first draft that we got last January. Michael and I bonded with this draft really well. We loved the draft. It had a lot of the images that we had picked out, especially the big image of the bridge in the middle was there. And then Lance, as Michael pointed out, had this awesome idea. That's why you get artists involved. He had friends at Richlight, which is a Tacoma company down on the Tide Flats, and they actually made 3 to scale with each other models of the 3 towers of the 3 bridges. And they are distributed across the display upstairs. You can go up there in a minute after we leave here, and you can touch them, feel them, whatever. They're made out of sustainable material. They're made out of many, many layers of paper compressed together with some dye in there, and they're beautiful. So I encourage you to touch them, feel them. The one on the left is a little less than 9 feet. The 2 newer bridges, the 1950 and 2007 bridge, are almost exactly the same size, and that's because they're next to each other. The architect didn't want to build them out of whack with each other. So that was an idea that Lance had that turned out really well. We thank Richlight. I'll thank him formally in a few minutes. That was an idea that really spawned the project. So I don't want to give too much detail because I want you to go up and see this, but you can see here the story that Michael was talking about. Whoops, I'm supposed to take the microphone with me, I'm sorry. The story that Michael was talking about with the towers, and there's a beautiful photograph there of opening day for the towers going across the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. There are photos of construction from the 1938-39 period that our engineering students can view and compare them to modern construction. And there's these 2 beautiful blueprints that contrast the 1940 and 1950 bridge. That's the first panel. The second panel is the famous panel. That's the day the bridge collapsed. We were able to get a copy of the newspaper from the day the bridge collapsed, so that's part of the display up there. And you see the panel 1 and panel 3 have a title. Panel 2 doesn't have a title because it's the title of the newspaper. Narrows Bridge Collapses serves as the title for what happens in the first one. But this one also For us lay people that don't know the physics, our civil engineering faculty was instrumental in putting a description together right here that talks in kind of layperson terms about what happened to the bridge, how it started fluttering that day, and we actually have a piece of the bridge right up here that we were able to get from the Gig Harbor Museum, the Harbor History Museum in Gig Harbor. So that's all in the display upstairs. Also, there's a brand new addition to that wall, and I'll let you see it when you get upstairs, but we secured a piece of cable, actually one of these suspender cables, right here from the bridge. Michael and I were giving a talk at the Harbor History Museum in November, and that led us to a gentleman here in the front row, Jean-Paul, whose grandfather actually salvaged some of that cable, and now it's on the wall upstairs, so you'll get to see that. And I encourage you to touch it. Just be careful. It's old and rusty, and I don't want you to hurt yourself. So that part is the accident. But then, as any story, you want to finish it with the happy part. So the happy part in this case is them rebuilding the bridge in 1950 and it being so successful that we had to add to it because of all the development on the west side of the Narrows now. Gig Harbor is growing. There's lots of development over there. So they added the bridge. And I was talking to the civil engineering faculty that helped us one day, and they said it'd be nice to have a nice quote from somebody that drives across the bridge all the time that could say something real positive about it. And then we started thinking about who could we ask? Could we just, stand out on the bridge and ask somebody if they were happy about it? And then we thought about our legislative representative from this district right here, the 27th district, happens to be Jake Fye. And Jake Fye is chair of the State of Washington Transportation Committee. So we asked him about it, and it just turns out that as a young man, he lived over on that side of the bridge, and he's driven back and forth thousands of times at these two bridges and loved them. So Jake made a quote for us, perfect what we were thinking about. He says, "Today, the two Tacoma Narrows Bridge Sisters represent one of the most successful transportation infrastructure projects of our time. They continue to serve as both a strikingly beautiful gateway to the Olympic Peninsula and an enduring legacy of a community's ingenuity, resilience, and persistence that has stood the test of time." So we were real happy with that quote, and I wish he was here today to see that, but he'll come and he'll see his name in lights. And then just two more pictures. This is the installation. You can see Lance, who's here in the front row, supervising. They might object to that term. He's probably admiring the installation. The installation was done by Image Mill, a company from Monroe, and we're going to talk about them in a second. They did a fantastic job. Here's John and Jerry putting up those Richlight bridge images. And they finished that whole thing in one day. They started about 9 o'clock, and by 4 it was completely done, with the exception of the piece that we added. And then we added these yesterday, and you'll notice they're made out of paper, but that's because we just got our movies all put together yesterday, got them loaded onto the server, so we didn't have time to actually manufacture little plastic QR codes. But there are working QR codes up there that will take you to the movies Michael was talking about, and we hope over time to add other QR codes as a civil engineering and mechanical engineering faculty figure out new parts of this story that they would like to tell, and students can work on that. So we have that capability now. So let me do one more thing. Let me thank all the people that helped bring this together. There were many of them. Michael and I started first at the Harbor History Museum. They have the largest collection of memorabilia from the bridge. We spent a couple of days out there finding images that we liked. Then Richlight, and Channy is here on behalf of Rodney, who's the CEO of Richlight. They made those 3 bridge samples for us for nothing, just gave them to us. And that material that they're made out of is the same material that's on the side of Tacoma Paper and Stationery Building. The south side of Tacoma Paper and Stationery, the brick was so bad that they had to put some kind of external coating on it. It's made out of that same material. And then Rotator, who designed this. Image Mill, who I already mentioned, Mike is back over here. The Tacoma Library, Public Library, gave us some images. The Washington Department of Transportation gave us several images and a toll schedule that's gone up a lot higher nowadays, but an original toll schedule. You'll see some of that up there. And the big picture of the bridge on the foggy morning after it fell, we looked everywhere for a nice high-resolution version of that, And lo and behold, we found it at the archives at the University of Washington Libraries. The Tacoma Narrows Tribune, the late Matt Driscoll was instrumental in helping find a lot of modern pictures of the 2007 bridge, and those pictures are gorgeous. You're going to see them up there. The Washington State Historical Museum supplied a couple pictures. Grit City Magazine supplied a movie from the other side. Some of you may have heard about the movie that's recently been found that was filmed from the west, looking back east. Get your phone out when you get up there, and you can watch that little movie from one of the QR codes. TPU, they're here today. They supplied one of the photographs and some of the confidence that Michael talked about. So thank you for the confidence. UWT civil engineering faculty, in particular, Emma Shea and Jeff helped review what we said and those kinds of things. I don't think Troy is in here, but Troy is the person who helped me cut that piece of cable. We went out to the Harbor History Museum and cut off a piece of the bridge. Stephanie from the museum let us have a little piece of the bridge, and you'll see it on the wall. Jean-Paul and Bruce, who went to our talk and made the piece of cable a reality, they're here today. UWT Facility Services have been fantastic in helping put this together. They actually supplied a carpenter yesterday, last minute, to get the cable on the wall. So thank you, Tessa. Mark painted, Mark Washington's the painter, painted it beautiful. So all these people, I hope I didn't leave some of you out, but I'm indebted to all of you for helping. Then we also had financial partners who helped. Kiewit, Richlight, Concrete Technology Corporation, KPFF, and Ethos Civil Engineering all helped us fund this project, as did Michael Sullivan and his wife. So we're just thankful to all these people. Let's give them all a